Download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources at savantwealth.com/guides.
Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to discuss, are you financially fit? My name is Ann Mank. I'm the Director of Financial Planning here at Savant, and I'm being joined today by Steve Graziano. Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Ann. Really glad to be here and glad all of you were able to join us. I am one of our financial planners. I work out of our Wellesley, Massachusetts location, which for those of you that aren't from the area is just outside of Boston. And what we are hoping for is that you're able to take some things out of this webinar today to help you become a little bit more financially fit or reduce some of those uncertainties that you might have. And whether you're planning on retirement, early in retirement, whether you're on the younger side of things and you want to start getting your finances in line, it's always a great time to take a look at whether you are financially fit. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ann, and we can kick this webinar off.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. So first we have to get the disclosures out of the way. So I'll put them up here real quick. Well, what's on today's agenda? So what we're going to talk about is what is financial fitness anyways? So it's a cool word that we use, but what does it really mean? And then we're going to look at some weak spots, some of those blind spots that might be stopping us from our financial fitness or our financial goals. We'll talk about how do we develop good habits when it comes to our finances. We'll also talk about some strategies to minimize that financial stress. I think that kind of creeps into our daily life, whether you have a rock solid plan or you're just at the beginning. We all handle stress a little bit differently. And so we'll talk about some strategies. And then we'll have some next steps. So some actionable items that you can take as soon as this webinar is completed. And then we'll have some time at the end for some question and answers as well. So feel free to add those questions at the bottom of the webinar there. You'll see the Q&A and then put your questions in there for us to look at the end. So what is financial fitness? Great question. So one way to think of it is it's the balance between what you're doing right now financially, making sure that you have a healthy state of finances, but then also at the same time preparing for your financial future. But one thing that I always like to do when I'm trying to figure out what my financial fitness looks like is come up with a definition. I think a lot of times we put these words out there and we have this idea, but it might be an idea that somebody's crafted for us. So we've never really thought about what does that mean for me? And it's kind of like, we're very used to physical fitness. And so if I said, I want to be physically fit, maybe my definition would be, I want to be able to run a 5K. I want to eat only organic foods, and I want to make sure I get a good night's sleep. So that is my definition. But you might ask somebody else, and their definition of physical fitness might be, climbing a mountain or doing an Ironman. So it can be very different compared to who you're asking. And so that's why we need to come to a definition for you. So I would like you to take the opportunity during this webinar to just jot down some ideas. What does financial fitness mean for you? Does it mean that, you're going to get a lottery ticket, win the lottery, and you'll never have to worry again? That could be one definition. But what we're trying to do is come up with a plan for you today. That's something that's actionable, something that you can do either on your own or with a partner, financial advisors, for example. But what is something that you can do right now that will get you one step closer to that idea of financial fitness? And so here are some just general ideas of what your definition might include. It might be an emergency savings. Like imagine if you had an emergency savings where you didn't have to worry about the car, maybe the engine in the car going out or the roof leaking, or, you trip on the sidewalk, break your leg and can't work for 4 weeks. So if there is one of those kind of life stressors, do you have the financial means to be able to handle it and not have to worry? Another idea is that you continually live below your means, which means that if you're making $100,000 a year, you're spending maybe $95,000 a year. So you always have some cushion, some room once again, being able to better prepare yourself if anything happens to you. Maybe your idea of financial fitness is minimizing financial stress. And a lot of individuals out there might think, I'm fine. I have plenty in my savings account. I have plenty in my retirement. I'm completely on path. But what you might not realize is that there are small stressors that might be creeping in. One very easy example is we all sign up for those little monthly memberships, or maybe you have an Apple subscription, or YouTube, Netflix, whatever it might be. Have you ever been there where you're like looking at your credit card statement or your bank statement and going, I really should get rid of that one, or I don't use that one, or why did I get this one in the first place? If it's something that you are constantly thinking about, it's a stressor. And so, what would it look like if you were completely spending your money on things that were important to you, that you felt valuable, and you got rid of all this kind of little clutter that's out there? Another idea is having that ongoing plan for the future. You might be perfectly fine where you are. I got the emergency fund, I'm living within my means, but you don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. You don't know when you might be able to retire. You don't know what retirement might look like for you. And so you constantly have this stress of what does that look like? So it's really important to have this definition, because everything else that we're going to talk about won't make a lot of sense, or you might not be able to hit your goals because you don't have this vision for yourself. You don't have this definition of what financial fitness means to you. And so we're going to talk about that through the rest of this time. Is what are those roadblocks? What are some of the strategies we can put in place? How can we help ourselves attain this ideal financial fitness? Or another way of saying it is, what does success look like? If I say I'm financially fit, draw me the picture. What does success look like? Where am I? What do I have? And what am I doing on a day-to-day basis? So with that, we're going to kick it over to Steve to help identify some of those weak spots.
Thanks, Ann. So, formulating a plan is one of the biggest hurdles that we have to improving our financial fitness. And like many things, in order to improve, the first step is really identifying the weak spots. Where do we need to improve upon, and how can we quantify success? And if you flip to the next page, one page before I was one behind you.
It's all good.
So where are we vulnerable? That is the first step to improving on our financial fitness. And one of those things that we talk about is having an emergency fund. Do we have additional assets that are not going to derail our financial stability? Here at Savant, we recommend having anywhere between 3 to 6 months worth of emergency savings at hand, so that we know if, God forbid, something were to happen, we aren't going to go broke, or we're not going to start to affect our retirement strategy, pulling on assets that aren't necessarily designated for that emergency. And if you don't currently have an emergency fund, or if it's not at the level that you want it to be, that's okay. This is a process. Just like physical fitness, it's not going to happen overnight. We can do it incrementally, but it's just getting started. It's having the initiative to understand we need to start putting a little bit more money away into that emergency savings. Second piece is account titling. This is something where typically if you purchase something, you title that asset, and you may not think about it again, but it's really worthwhile to do a bit of an investigation into how your assets are titled, because it can have an effect on your financial wellness. Are they titled? And we'll go a little bit more into titling, but there are a variety of different ways that we can title your assets, and we just need to make sure that they are titled correctly. Rental property, for instance, in your personal name. If you do have a rental property and it's in your personal name, that is a liability for your financial wellness. And we want to talk about whether that should be in an LLC, or if there's another way that that asset should be titled. Adequate umbrella liability insurance. If something were to happen, outside of in your life, are you protected? Is your financial life protected from potentially a lawsuit? Property and casualty insurance. This is something we always look into with our clients to make sure they're fully secured. Disability insurance. This is often offered through your human resources as a benefit. If you're not taking advantage of it, it's something that here at Svant we would talk to you about. Is it worthwhile to be participating in your disability insurance? And is that insurance enough for your personal situation? Everyone's insurance needs are going to be different. We want to do an analysis and we want to make sure that you have done something similar to make sure you're protected. And lastly, we do talk about life insurance and how that affects your financial wellness and financial fitness. Are you underinsured? Are you overinsured? Are you properly insured? That is important. All right, some elements of financial wellness to help you stop with your poor habits. And Anne talked a little bit about spending less, not living paycheck to paycheck. This starts with creating an effective budget. Budgeting can be one of the most strenuous, not enjoyable activities. It's not fun to sit down and do every line item that you're spending money on, but at the end of the day, it is going to help you. It's a worthwhile process. It's going to reduce your stress surrounding your expenses because you now understand what's coming in, what's going out, how much are we spending on entertainment. Anne used the example of Netflix and paid subscriptions. I am the worst offender of this because I have every login for HBO Max and Paramount. And at the end of the day, do I necessarily need those? That's a different discussion. But if we budget, we at least understand what those expenses are, and then we can make the appropriate decisions. Saving for emergencies, I talked a little bit about that. We recommend about 6 months of income to make sure that during that emergency, by definition, we don't know when it's going to happen. It pops up, life comes at us fast, and we want to make sure we're preparing for that. Statistics show us that not enough Americans really are. Nearly 70% of Americans near or at retirement have less than $250,000 in their savings for retirement and otherwise. So we do want to make sure, not just for retirement, but we are saving for those spur of the moment emergencies that just come at us. Maximizing your benefits is another important strategy. 23% of households currently that currently use 401k plans are drawing on that money, those retirement assets, to pay for non-retirement expenditures. This is directly correlated to planning for those emergencies. So by doing one thing, by beginning to start setting aside money for those unpredictable events, we're able to make sure that that retirement benefit that we're putting aside money for is able to remain that retirement benefit. And then lastly, planning for the future. And this is one of the biggest things that we emphasize. Just going through life on a day-to-day basis without a plan or a strategy, while it may work a lot of the time, isn't going to work 100% of the time. So if we have a plan in place, written down, and whether it's followed to a T, it doesn't have to be followed to a T. We don't live in a vacuum, and as financial planners, we don't expect everything to go according to plan 100%. But we're constantly adapting, and we want to make sure that we do have some form of written plan so that we can be as close to it as possible. And when things change, we make sure we change with them. And I know on a personal level, reduce your anxiety surrounding it, which improves happiness in general. And, just like I mentioned with those those disruptive events, the last thing that you want to be going through when something traumatic or disruptive happens in your life is figuring out all the financial aspects that come along with that. God forbid somebody passes away that you love. The last thing you're worried about is contacting your bank to figure out if you have enough money. We really want to talk to our clients and to all of our prospects about understanding those expenses ahead of time so that when that time happens, it's the last thing that you need to deal with. Divorce, becoming disabled, potentially losing your job, and nobody saw 2020, the global pandemic happening. If we start having those conversations today, hoping that they never happen, it will allow you to reduce that uncertainty, reduce the stress that down the road this may or may not happen, and ultimately help you achieve a higher level of financial fitness.
Perfect. Thanks. So this next topic I love talking about. So developing good habits. And the reason I love talking about it is kind of twofold. One is I know the power of good habits. If we get the right habits in place, things become easier, you just crush your goals. But the other reason why I like talking about this is because it's hard for me to do. I am not a habit type person. Like I know some people out there that are just, they put a plan in place and they start those habits. That is not me. So I also need some of these constant reminders of how do I develop a good habit. So how do we improve our financial fitness through habits? First of all, we need to start with our values. What is important to us? So we've been kind of doing this in layers. So first, what is our definition of financial fitness? Understanding why it's important to have that financial fitness. And now we are tying that to our values. What is important to us? Is family important to you? Is taxes, being most tax efficient, important to you? Is your church or charitable things that you want to do, are those important to you? So really understanding what your values are. Now what we want to do is we want to take your definition, we want to take your values and start developing a plan that aligns with your values and your goals. And one way that I like to do this, or just to see kind of how off we are from our financial fitness, and I don't know if anybody's ever done this before, but looking at your bank statement, looking at your credit card statements, kind of gather all of your expenses into buckets. So this isn't a budget. We're not going to go backwards or hold ourselves to this. But what we're trying to figure out is where do we spend the most of our money? So before I talked about my physical fitness, like I want to make sure, that I can run a 5K, I'm eating good food, drinking a lot of water. Well, if I'm looking at my statements and I notice that a lot of my money is going to, fast food places, maybe going to items I'm picking up at Target, like I can then very easily see this disconnect because I've just defined my financial fitness. I know health is a value to me because I want to make sure that I'm here for a long time with my family. And now what am I spending my money on? And so that disconnect is going to cause stress. So this is just another way that stress creeps into your life based on what you're doing, and you might not notice it. So what we need to do is come up with a plan to get you closer to your values. So you want to establish something where you can put some discipline into it and then revisit it here we say annual, but it's not hard once you have the system in place to just kind of check in on yourself. It can even be in the very moment you are. Like, let's say I go to Target and I just hop over to Starbucks and I'm drinking my coffee, and all of a sudden I realize that this isn't what is in my plan or what I value. Like right there, I can make the decision. So I think sometimes when we're putting these plans in place, we're thinking that there are these huge stones that we have to move. And it really is those choices you make on a moment-to-moment basis and how you react to it. And then what you want to do is create better money habits by prioritizing saving first. It's kind of that saying, pay yourself first and then pay everyone else. So if you are saving money, you are in essence paying yourself, your future self first. And the easiest way to do that is to automate. Find a way to either have money coming right from your paycheck to either a brokerage account or your retirement account or, a cash bucket that you have earmarked for one of your goals, but automate it. And then if it's a possibility, have that increase every quarter or on an annual basis so you don't think about it. Get yourself out of the way and you're more likely to actually get to your goals. And then lastly, it's all about discipline, sticking to your plan, but then also knowing to give yourself grace. So for example, if I'm at Target drinking the Starbucks, knowing it's not ultimately what I value or where I want to go for my financial fitness, I can give myself grace in the moment and then figure out how to move forward from there. So it's very important not to have judgment, not to give up. I'm definitely a person who's like, go big or go home. And so I'll try and put 70 different, things in place on my plan of I want to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And then I don't do one of them on one particular day, and I might blow up the whole plan. So make sure you give yourself grace and don't have judgment and just move on from there on how you can improve going forward. And the next thing to do to develop good habits is kind of prepare now. So a lot of times we think, oh, I can do that tomorrow, or I'll do that when the kids are out of the house, or I'll do that when I retire. But it's always better to do it now than after a traumatic event. You don't want loved ones trying to find bank statements, trying to find your estate plan when they're already dealing with the stress of whatever is happening to you. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you are married or have a partner, make sure that each other knows what you're doing. Like, I want to make sure that my husband understands what I'm doing, and I want to understand what he's doing. I don't want to do it. Like, for example, working at Savant, I handle our investment accounts. He doesn't want to know what's happening on a day-to-day basis, but at least when we get the quarterly statements, we sit down and we talk about what we have and what our goals are and what our plans are. And from the flip side, he tends to handle a lot of like the bill paying or, all the kids' activities. And so he fills me in on that. But that's how we're preparing now. It doesn't have to be something overly burdensome. It's just something where there's a consistency of looking at these documents and then gather them together. So have, either, a secure file somewhere on your computer, have a binder with copies of all the important documents. Maybe it's your wealth advisor and your accountant and your doctor and your legal team. Have that in one place so that if something does happen to you, somebody can find that. Especially if you are a single individual. So if you don't have a partner, if you're not married, make sure that you've identified the person who is going to help you if anything happens to you. And let them know where this information is. You don't have to tell them, here's my balance, here's how much I have in it. All they need to do is know where they need to go, the phone numbers to call, and how best to help you. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of these key documents that you should have, but I can't emphasize enough, do it now. Like, I don't want my husband to ever try and find all of this stuff as I'm sitting in a hospital room and he's trying to coordinate my care, the kids and what we're doing with that, and then also our financial life as well. So try to minimize as much of that stress as you can before it happens. And next, Stephen's going to talk about minimizing some of this financial stress we just talked about.
Thank you, Anne. And actually that tailors kind of right into what we're going to talk about, which is strategies for minimizing that. It starts with really cataloging all of that information that Anne just brought up. It is just like budgeting. The hardest part is getting started. The hardest part is doing that initial full cataloging of all of your accounts, all of your information that's going to be needed. And once you have it, it's modifying. But getting started, making sure all of your asset information, all of your funeral and family contact information, making sure it's all documented and in the right place. And on that note, what I share with all of my clients is we want to make sure we have all the information, but the information doesn't do us any good if two things: your partner doesn't know where it is, or if it ends up getting destroyed in any way. So what I recommend is buying, going to Target, Walmart, Amazon, and buying a fireproof safe and creating a file system where all of your important documentation is going to be there. You can buy those folders that are different colors and color code the different aspects of your financial life, and that way everyone knows if we're talking about our insurance or if we're talking about our investment accounts, that's going to be in the green folder in that fireproof safe that we store all of our important documents. We talk about all of our health documents, health insurance, your living will, which we're going to touch on briefly in a minute, all of your emergency contact information, that will be in the safe. Any sort of other important information like birth certificates, passports, passwords to all of the other accounts that you have. We live in a very different world than 30 years ago. Everything is online, and you're going to want to know all of that information, have it stored in one place so that, God forbid, something were to happen, those accounts can be accessed. And this isn't just with digital currencies, but think, Facebook and Instagram accounts. And a lot of people no longer have the photo books that we used to go through where you could look back at your pictures. All of our pictures now are stored online. So that information, if it's safe, it doesn't have to be in a fireproof safe like I recommend for my clients, although it's hard to lose a fireproof safe. But if it's in a safe location and it's all together, you take away any of the guesswork that comes with your financial life, and it eliminates any of the stressors that might happen when they're looking for that. The next aspect of financial fitness that we talk a lot about with our clients is distribution planning. And this happens to tie in how things are titled. It happens to tie in things like wills and trusts, which we hear about all the time, but not everybody is completely certain about what those mean, how much power or authority do they have. So let's go through that a little bit. Now, we want all of our clients to have a will. What a will does is it explains how we want our property to be transferred should we pass away. And that process of asset transfer is known as probate. Probate is through the court system. It can be expensive. It is a public process, but most of the time, the biggest headache is the delay. The delay of probate can take 3, 6, 12 months. And this is if your will is written correctly. Now, if, God forbid, you don't have a will, or if you have multiple wills, or there may be wording that is a little bit unclear, that can only take longer. So we want to make sure everyone has a will. We want to make sure it is worded correctly and that there's only one of those wills. If we want to reduce the possibility of probate, this is where we start to talk about having a trust established. A living or revocable trust allows that property to be transferred at death without the court and without it being in the public eye. So there are a number of different assets that we can include in that trust. Again, everyone's situation is unique and different. Trusts allow a lot more flexibility than just having a will. So we do suggest having a trust in place, a living or revocable trust in place, to help prevent any heartache or delay in that asset transfer. And then taking an inventory of all those assets that you have. I mentioned it up front, but we buy things and then they get titled. Everything has to be titled, but we don't often revisit how it's titled. So we want to make sure everything is titled correctly based on your current situation. We don't live in a vacuum and things change. As those things happen, maybe the way we titled it initially isn't the best way for us anymore. So we want to make sure we do a inventory of all of our assets and make sure they're titled correctly based on our lifestyle today. So I mentioned briefly our digital footprint and how that has grown. Let's talk a little bit about powers of attorney and how they're effective tools to avoid the need to bring in any court-appointed guardianship in the event of a disability. So we recommend everybody uses statutory forms. That is, forms from the government that have to be, that are worded correctly to make sure there's no friction when that is put into place. They are effective immediately or upon physician certification. And we also recommend naming multiple successor agents if possible. A living will or advanced directive, if you go down to power of attorney for healthcare versus a living will, what the power of attorney for healthcare is, they're going to be the person that executes what your desires are when and should they need to. Your living will is actually going to be the instructions for your power of attorney for healthcare. So if you have a power of attorney for healthcare, that is great. You're also going to want a living will or advanced directive. Likewise, if you have an advanced directive, you're going to need somebody that you trust to be your power of attorney for healthcare. Important to note, power of attorneys or durable power of attorneys and power of attorneys for healthcare are two different things. One is going to be for all your financial information, for all your financial acts that need to be done, and one is going to be for your healthcare. They do not need to be the same person, and oftentimes they aren't the same person. I know in my family, I'm the successor power of attorney, and my older sister is the successor power of attorney for healthcare because my parents, I work in this side of the business, and my sister works in the medical side of the business. We just want to make sure that there is somebody named on that front. A couple important facts about the advanced directive. You can access them. I'll share a website. It's called caringinfo.org. And on that website, every individual state's directive will be on there. So every state has their own advanced directive. Each state does not necessarily need to abide by another person's state. There are states that have agreements. If, for instance, I'm in Massachusetts, I know we have an agreement with New Hampshire and Rhode Island because we're so close. But at the same time, I advise everyone to get both states if they're going to be in New Hampshire or if they're going to be in Rhode Island, because they do not have to abide by them. I also emphasize for my clients that it's not just for aging parents or aging selves that we need these directives in place. An often overlooked person that we should have an advanced healthcare directive in place for is our adult age children. So think if you have any children or know anybody that has children that might be 18 to 22, 23, and they're still very much your child, but in the eyes of the law, they are adults. If you don't have an advanced healthcare directive in place, and God forbid your child is hospitalized for any reason, the hospital cannot share any information with you. So it's important to make sure you have a directive in place, you have access to their information, should they end up being hospitalized for any reason whatsoever. And then if something were to happen, who do they call? Anne touched on this a little bit. During times of duress, during times of trauma, the last thing you want to be doing is wondering, where is X, Y, and Z? What type of information do I need for this and that? We want to make sure that's all outlined prior to when that time happens. So I mentioned the safe idea. Make sure you have something like that. How do they locate it? What is it? Is there a digital asset or asset account that they should know about? And then asset titling. Is this titled as joint tenants in common? Is it joint tenants with rights of survivorship, which means that two parties own the property, and should one pass away, it automatically is transferred to that single person or survivor? we want to make sure that everything is titled correctly based on the state that we're living in.
Perfect. And this is all really great information. Like even as you were talking too, as we define financial fitness, it was really, how do we have a healthy financial balance sheet now, and then also plan for the future, and how do we reduce this stress? And, we're talking very broadly, but then there's other circumstances too that you might want to think about. Like, for example, I have a child with special needs. So one of my stressors would be, how do I make sure she is okay if something happens to me? So a lot of times as you're going through this and you're working with your trusted advisors, they'll bring up questions like that. Like, do you have any children with special needs? Do you have any children who are bad with money? Do you have parents that you're going to have to take care of? All of those kind of fit into your financial world and should be thought of as you're putting your plan together. Because there are, especially for special needs, there are, certifications. We have certifications that we can be a special needs specialist. And then we're thinking about, well, we need additional legal documents. One of the things I think about is, if anything would happen to me, do I have a document that explains how best to care for her? Because once again, we're trying to reduce stress in a very stressful situation. If I'm not there, at least somebody can step in and help with her. And if I'm not there, at least somebody can step in and help with my finances. And so it's all of this of putting this together. And so it's extremely important. And so what we'll do now is kind of go through next steps. And one thing we can do is take this financial health assessment. So the link is going to go into the chat. And I actually love this assessment. As soon as I saw it, I took it right away. And you might be thinking, why would somebody who's been in, finance and accounting world for over 20 years need to take this? I think it's because there's always blind spots that we don't know that we're either not paying attention to or we haven't focused on. And so this financial health assessment's a really quick assessment, but it goes through these 10 key planning areas that we go through at Savant. And it's things like, not only have you done investments, but do you plan for retirement? Do you have that written retirement plan? What does your debt look like? How are you leveraging your debt? Or is it bad debt, good debt? What does that look like? Education planning, like, what's the best way for you to get your kids through college if that's one of your goals? How do we look at tax efficiencies? How do we make sure that when we're taking distributions in retirement, we've thought about the tax impact that might have? If you have a business, if you are charitably inclined, this will help you determine, okay, where am I going to start first? Because it will give you a score and it'll give you that kind of guidance of, okay, here is your next step. The other thing you can do is connect with us. So we'll also put a link in the chat so that you can get a free 15-minute introductory call. And in this call, you can ask us any and all questions. Like, that's what this is for you to get a better understanding of what's the next step. How do we go forward? Because a lot of times this can be overwhelming. It can be hard to find that right direction. We might, if you're like me, try to do it all and realize nothing is actually being done. And so feel free to schedule this and get the help that you might be looking for. And so next we're going to answer some questions, but I'm going to put the disclaimer here too, because I don't want to forget that. But we had some questions that came through. I'll kind of take the first one here, but one was talking about, okay, I want to do a habit. I want to put this in place, but how can I stay motivated? How can I really see this through? And one way I think about it is, it's kind of like a triple A. So the first thing you want to do is just take action. So everything that we've gone through, just pick one thing. And after this webinar, just do one step towards it. It doesn't have to be a large step. But what we find is if you don't take action right after a webinar, you probably aren't going to think about it again because life gets in the way. So commit to taking one action right now. The next part of AAA is automate. It's the perfect time to start doing that automated contribution into a savings account. Or maybe it's to automate an increase in your 401k. Or maybe it's an automated budgeting system. And it might not even be that you need to budget, but maybe you just want to know where it's going so that you can make sure that your values are getting the most of your assets. And then the last part of the AAA is accountability. Find a way to have some accountability on your goals. Now, I'm a little biased here because the easiest way I think to have accountability is to find a financial advisor you trust, put that plan in place, figure out where you are starting from, what step needs to be taken, and then have your advisor reach out to you on a quarterly basis and say, how are you doing on that plan? That is the easiest way to have accountability. And then you don't have to worry about, what your neighbor is saying or what your family might think. It's a third party. They'll say, okay, these are your goals. Let's do this. Let's help you get to that. And they'll hold you accountable. So I like to go with the 3 A's. It's action, it's automating, and then having yourself accountable. So Steve, was there any questions that you were noticing from the group?
Yes, as you were just answering that, I was going through a few, and there's one that has kind of a common theme. I'll tie it together. It's asking how we're different than some other firms that were mentioned, or than maybe some other firms that people have access to online. One of the biggest differences I think working for Savant, it's the reason why I joined here from another firm, is that we're very planning forward. We focus on understanding our clients, understanding their values, understanding their goals. Where are they now and where do they want to be? And if they're on the right track, helping them improve or stay on track. If there are improvements to be made, we try to understand that. And at that point, once we've begun to build the foundation of a financial plan, do we start to pull on the different instruments that we can, investments being one of them. Oftentimes, when I'm at a conference or talking with other people in the industry, they might focus a little bit more heavily on the investments up front and then start to talk about the plan and what those investments mean for the plan. But it is our belief that without understanding what the ultimate goals are, we can't talk about security selection or anything else. So planning forward, understanding what is important and the values that our clients have definitely separates us from many of the firms that are out there. And I would also touch on something that Ann mentioned, which is financial planning is overwhelming. Oftentimes people don't do it because getting started might seem so hard, or we'll do this another day. And I want to say it's not. It might seem daunting, but when you sit down and you start to work with somebody or on your own, you start to identify your financial fitness and are there things that we can improve upon. That right there is the hardest step, and it only gets easier after that moment. So whether it's giving us a phone call or scheduling a 15-minute meeting with us to help us so we can help you answer a couple questions, we don't want it to be a stressful time for you. It really can be relatively easy for us to have that discussion and start to instantly alleviate some of that stress for you.
Perfect. And then there was another question here on just that emergency fund. And I know Steve had talked about 3 to 6 months, but the question really is, how do we know that's the right balance for us? And how do we go about saving in the first place? And I would say 3 to 6 months is very general. It really depends on what your emergencies might look like. And so if you're a person who maybe you're a solopreneur, you own your own business, maybe you work on commissions, you might want to have more in your bucket at that point in case maybe the sales don't come through, maybe you don't have as much revenue or business because you're just starting off. So having 12 months might make sense for you. But that's why it's very important to understand what your risk might be so that you can plan for them accordingly. And then when it comes to saving, one of the kind of standard rule of thumbs is that you should be saving 20%. And it should be saving for future either goals, aspirations, emergency funds. And so if you're looking at the money that's coming in and you're putting away 20% of that towards your future goals, you're probably on track. But once again, like Steve said, there are a lot of pieces that go into this, and having a good financial plan makes all the difference. Because a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And so we need to have those experts coming in, the experts of the legal side, the tax side, the planning side, your financial advisor. And that's one of the things that we do here at Savant, is have kind of all those experts together to put that in place for you and say, you know, you need X amount of emergency funds and we need you saving, you know, this percentage and put it into this bucket. Once again, make it easy. We tend to kind of get in our own way with a lot of these things. So the more that we can have somebody else take it off our plate for us, or we can automate it, the easier it is to get to our goals. And Steve, did you see any other questions, or I think we're good?
I think we're good. If we didn't answer your question, there's a good chance it might be a little bit more specific than we'd address with the whole audience, and we need to understand a little bit more about your unique situation. So again, please give us a call, and we can certainly chat through everybody's individual situation. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to your question.
Perfect. And with that, thank you for joining us today in this live webinar. Feel free to schedule the call, but I would highly recommend at least taking that assessment and seeing where you stand. So thanks again and have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.
If you enjoyed this webinar, visit savantwealth.com/guides and download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources.